Hey folks, what's up? Welcome back to Fixing the Fish, and today I'm fishing beds again. And as you can tell, I'm fishing a little jig. I've been fishing a lot of beds lately. And for me, fishing beds, my weapon of choice is always going to be a jig over anything else, because one of the things I like about fishing jigs is when you get the hook in them, the weed guard will actually press up against the side of their face and hold them in there, as opposed to an open hook. I really like that. It's almost like a little safety catch. The other day I went to the Quarry and I found a bed. These fish were about 6 feet down, and I got a hook in them, and I got the female, and she was so strong that she literally just busted my line. 10-pound line, fluoro, like it was nothing. The knot held, but she just busted my line. And it turns out she was a lot bigger than I thought she was. So I finally hooked her with a jig, another jig I had. And when I finally got her to the top, the fish that I originally thought was only a couple pounds turned out to be more like 6 or 7. And I had seriously underestimated her size. I almost got her out of the water. My rod, my medium heavy, was on the verge of breaking. I had about 3 feet of air between me and the fish, and if I had had a net, I probably would have gotten her. But she shook her head and got off. That's a bite. Got him. So there was a bed there. I just happened to drag across. But if you're lucky enough to fish clear water, you will actually see these beds. That fish is warm. Whoa, I got you in the eye there, buddy. There we go. Where was I? So if you're lucky enough to be sight fishing where you can actually see the beds, you'll see in the early part of when they're starting to pair up, you'll see males that are guarding beds, and then you'll see ones that are paired up together, a male and female. I've noticed that I get the most aggressive bites on fish that are already paired up together. I'm not saying you can't catch a single male on a bed, but usually I get my best bites on bass that are already paired up on a bed. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm sight fishing and not blind fishing like this is, if I can see the nest, I will cast just past the nest, and then I will slowly creep the jig to the edge of the nest and just leave it there. Leave it there for almost 2 minutes, just shaking my rod, just giving it a little bit of subtle action. Don't hammer it, just little subtle movements. And that really upsets the bass. When you finally do start to drag it into the middle of the bed, that fish is primed. Sometimes you won't get a reaction even from a couple. They have to be in that mode where they're aggressive. But the longer you hang your bait out on the edge of that nest, the more time that bass has to look at it and get more and more worked up about it. So when you finally do, slowly drag it, and I mean slowly, don't go through the bed super fast. You want to build up tension in that fish. You want them to get so pissed off that when you finally do drag it through there, they are ready to kill whatever goes through there. And another thing I found really effective fishing beds is if you're not getting a lot of attention, you can tell if the fish really isn't concerned about something or isn't recognizing it as a threat by whether or not the fish is turning its head and looking at your bait while it's on the bed. If the bass looks at your bait, sees it on the edge there, and just swims away from it, doesn't seem to care, you need to keep messing with your baits until you find something that works. Sometimes a jig won't work. You can play with trailers, but one of the things I like to do is if I can't get any kind of attention on a jig, I will immediately go to one of those little Berkeley swim shads. I found that to be really a great way to really upset the fish, because it looks kind of like a sunfish. And what I'll do is I'll do the same thing I do with the jig. I'll throw it, let it sink to the bottom, twitch it a little bit, let it sit on the edge of the nest, and by then you should be getting some kind of reaction out of the bass. You should be looking at the swim shad, doing that head turn, and then when you finally do drag it or hop it very gently into the nest, you should get some kind of reaction from the fish. And a lot of times they'll either bump it or they'll pick it up in their mouth and try to move it. And until that fish gets hooked by your bait, it won't have any fear of it. So sometimes it's better to hold off on setting the hook, because once you set the hook, that fish is on the road to being conditioned to your bait. So a lot of times, sort of wait and see before you do that hook set. Wait and see if you're getting bumped or if you're actually getting picked up. And of course, you're going to do a lot of this if you have hair algae, cleaning off the jig. You'll notice that I have a very small trailer on here. I like a smaller trailer because a lot of times when you're fishing beds, the bass will pick it up by the appendages instead of the hook. You want to make it difficult for the bass to do that. So my preference is for smaller trailers that sort of force the fish to grab the bait as a whole so that you can get a good hook set on them. The spawn, I should say the early stages of the spawn, is one of the few times that I actually don't regret not fishing out of a boat. You have a much easier time seeing the beds from the bank a lot of the times than you do from a boat. Because a lot of times the trees, the overhangs, will give you enough shade from the glare to actually see the beds, whereas on a boat, you're off the bank, you're more in the sun. And a lot of times I have trouble seeing beds from a boat, so sometimes it's better to be on the bank for that. One of the things I like to do with my jigs, if they're not heavy gauge hook jigs, is bend the hook out, trim the skirt, and cut down the bait to be more compact. So what you want to do is you want to take a pair of pliers and just bend this hook upwards. Then you want to trim your skirt up so it's not too massive. I usually trim it to the bottom of the hook shank right about there, make that even, and then I'll thin out the skirt. I'll cut it at an angle to help really lock in that bite. One thing I do like to do, which I didn't do with this one, unfortunately, I like to take a little super glue and super glue the trailer to the jig. If you need it to come off, the seal will break pretty easily, but it'll keep your bait on there. Used all my super glue, so I've run out, so I'm not doing that. I'm constantly adjusting, but it'll save you from having to do that. Really makes life a lot easier. Other things I like to do to my trailer are, you'll notice I've dipped the claws, just the tips of these appendages, with garlic chartreuse dye. For some reason, just doing the tips seems to be a lot more effective than doing the whole claws. It does make a difference, in my opinion. So with that, a little is a lot. You really don't need to do the entire appendage. Just do the very ends of them. Just the very tip of the claws. So I've been using this little, this is actually a storm swim shad. You can jig a bed with it. Apparently there's a bed over here somewhere. And I caught her. A decent size. Always be sure to release your bed fish where you catch them, so they can get back to their nest as fast as they can. I've actually heard horror stories about people that release fish in a different lake that they catch them in, which is just the dumbest thing ever. No matter how experienced you are as a fisherman, there's always going to be situations that you just never run into before, or conditions that are different than what you're used to, and all you can do is learn from them so that the next time you'll be better prepared. And that's basically what happened to me. I've also learned not to underestimate the size of the fish in the water if the water is clear. So that's going to do it for me, y'all. I hope some of y'all found some of my tips useful. Just an FYI, guys, I'm going to have some serious dental surgery on Monday, so I'm going to be out for a little while as I recover from that. Not looking forward to it. Definitely gonna get in the way of getting back to bed fishing on the Quarry, but hopefully I'll recover quickly enough that I can sort of get out there and try to catch that monster bass that's just been eluding me. And this time I'm a lot more prepared for what will happen if I hook into her. Till next time, thanks for watching.